Ichimoku traders? Chris Capri here, SecondSkiesForex.com. So here is the video on understanding Ichimoku context. And the goal of this video is to kind of give you a structure and methodology as kind of like a base template so that you can pull up a chart on a very particular time frame and multiple time frames and be able to kind of understand what Ichimoku is communicating to you in a contextual perspective. What's the overall context? What's the overall picture gestalt? What's the general picture that Ichimoku is trying to communicate through that chart and through that time frame? And so we're going to kind of do this in a very interesting experiment, which is that my guess is there's going to be a lot of questions on this. And part of this will be because I'm going to be putting this information in a way that will kind of force you to at least re-examine your approach to Ichimoku a little bit. But we're going to be using things in this course that are already there, but we're going to be giving you a real template to work with. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for, I don't know, 5 or 6 slides, I'm going to present to you just pure information, pure concept. And so take notes, pause, replay it again as much as possible. You can watch this video as many times as you need. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to show you some examples to kind of demonstrate each of these concepts and how they manifest and how we can apply this kind of system for understanding and discovering the Ichimoku context. I don't think that that's gonna just this one time fully get it for you. It's very rare that people can just watch a video like this one time and just get it all. So then what's gonna happen is that after you watch the video, you're gonna probably have some questions, and that's still okay. Write the questions down. Then I want you to watch the video again and then see if some of those questions are answered, because oftentimes I get questions from students that are actually in the video. So I want you to watch it again because you're probably not going to catch everything the first time. After you've watched it a second time, then I want you to start posting some examples using this methodology in the course under this video. And then I'll kind of be like, yeah, this good job, nice job, work on this and this and that. And then what's going to happen is that I'm going to wait probably like a week or two, and I'm going to kind of look at some of the deeper questions that come from this video that won't be easily answered via a poster or just a reply. And then I'm going to collate all them, and then I'm going to do a follow-up video to support this, to say, okay, here is such and such question, here's how, here's my answer, and here's an example to kind of demonstrate that. So this way we really get a chance to kind of dive into this topic a little bit. So that's how we're going to do this. I'm going to start off by introducing what is the base of context. We're going to talk about then higher or various time frames. Then we're going to talk about a gradation system. And then we're going to talk about what that means in terms of the underlying components for how you kind of look at, or what are the individual components that are a part of that gradation system. And then we're going to go into pure examples. So I know this is going to be heavy on concept in the beginning. Just be patient. We'll get to all these questions. So to begin with, Ichimoku context is based upon wave theory plus the 5 lines. Some of you are probably going, wait a minute, what about time? What about price? And I'm going to answer that before I actually get into wave and 5 lines. So time and price are not really, while they are, time and price are part of the 3 pillars, they're not the best way to understand context. They're more for potential turning points and kind of a way to potentially predict or guesstimate where the future price may turn or when the future price may turn. But they're not part of the context. In fact, they're subjected to context. If you remember from the price video, one of the things I said, which is that both Hosade and Hidenobu Sasaki both said the same thing about price. Price is not meant to be a set in stone thing, and it's meant to kind of give you a potential idea of where things may land before they start to turn. But that price is subservient to the Ichimoku context itself, wave and 5-line structure. So in terms of price, that's why it's not part of the context. It's more of a predictive tool, and it's subservient to it. Time is also meant to give you potential future turning points, but the thing about it is that it can always extend to kind of the next time. Maybe it's not 9, maybe it's 17, or maybe it's 26. But it's the bottom line is that we don't look at time as an absolute thing. We always evaluate it within the guise or within the kind of communication of what the context is. So Ichimoku context, in my opinion, is wave structure plus 5 lines. Now, with that being said, there are really, in terms of time frames, two types of context. There is what I would call higher time frame context, which is the weekly and the daily. You could even include the monthly in this. The thing about it is that the monthly chart in terms of Ichimoku is looking at such a large time frame. It would be like the equivalent of holding trade for years. And I'm willing to bet that probably less than 1% of you have done that, have even held a trade for a year and a half. So to me, we'll be looking at weekly and daily as the higher time frame context. We don't have to go to the weekly, but that's generally about as far as I would want to go in terms of Ichimoku, because I don't plan on, unless I'm planning on like holding a long-term stock or something like that, you're not going to see me go to the monthly. But I may go to the weekly. If I want to look at what Ichimoku is communicating for a year, then I would be looking at the weekly. If you're not really looking a year's time ahead, and you're more looking a few months, maybe a quarter, half a year, anything less than a year, then really you don't need to be working with anything other than the daily. And that will be your higher time frame context. ITD contracts, intraday context, will be in the realm of the 4 hour and 1 hour. I really don't personally like going below those time frames when it comes to Ichimoku, and there could be an argument and there could be a case made that you shouldn't be going below anything on the daily. And, if you understand why, let me know. I'd be curious to hear your answers on that. So, intraday context is really kind of communicating on a relative spectrum. And, I know you're going to want a fixed answer, but there is no fixed answer for this. It's more of a relative spectrum of anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks. And that's really the most you're going to kind of get out of the intraday context. If your holding time is within a day to maybe a couple weeks, then you're going to want to take scope of the intraday context. If your holding time is longer than that, then you really don't need the intraday context, other than maybe you kind of want to refine an entry a little bit. See if you can kind of use the intraday to kind of give you a more refined entry, because intraday context is really just a more micro look at a smaller set of data and what's happening in terms of the price action and Ichimoku. So it's important to understand how these two are kind of different lenses into the same pieces of information. It is important to understand, just like price action, intraday context can and often will contradict the higher time frame context. That doesn't mean if the higher time frame context is bearish and the intraday contract says bullish, that you should ignore the higher time frame context. Higher time frame context will dominate. It will dominate the larger kind of flow of things. That doesn't mean that it's going to be right for this day or the next day, but the overall structure and movement will generally align itself with the higher time frame context versus the lower time frame context. So having perfect collusion between those two is not something that you should be going for, and it's not something that you should only aim for. If they do coincide and they communicate the same picture, fantastic. But don't expect them to. And you'll have to kind of understand that understanding or working with Ichimoku context is working with that potential contradiction. That it's not going to be perfect clarity. And that's just part of trading that you're going to have to accept. Now, before we get into the 5 lines in the wave system, I'm going to explain the gradation system so that you understand how you can kind of mark or create kind of like a scoring like system for Ichimoku context. And it's very straightforward. You have plus plus plus, which is everything is super strong. You have plus plus, which is medium strength. You have a single plus, which is a minor amount of strength. You have a 0, which represents the neutral. And then now we're on the other end of the spectrum. We have minus for slightly bullish, 2 minuses for medium bullishness or bearishness, and 3 minuses for very bearish. Before you have questions about what this means or what this looks like, I will go over examples. In fact, we're going to go over examples of charts that we recently talked about, and then I'm going to gradate it, or I'm going to give you my gradation of it, and then you're going to kind of see, okay, yeah, I can see how this lines up like this. Now, as we talked about before, the 2 components of Ichimoku context are the 5 lines. And the 5 lines, Tenkan for TK, Kijun, KJ for Kijun, Kumo, and the Chikou. The Kumo is composed of 2 lines, Senko span A and B, but we have to think of them as one cohesive whole in communication. They do communicate different things, but we have to look at the Kumo as one piece of the puzzle. So really, you're looking at 4 things. You're not separating Senko span A and Senko span E and trying to give an individual gradation for each one. The Chikou span, being the last of the 5 lines, will have its own kind of communication as well. And we'll talk about that, and we'll go over, like a first example, we're going to look at Dao Yen, and I'm going to go over each of the 5 lines and what that's communicating to me and how I would grade it. In terms of the wave system, it's mostly going to be centering around the end structure. The end structure is the most important wave. It is composed of subwaves, but those are minor waves. The most important wave in the wave system is the end wave. The P wave and the Y wave are, yes, they're communicating a contraction or expansion of volatility, but they're meant to communicate a likely continuation, all things being equal. And so when we're looking at the wave system in terms of context, we're going to be looking at the end structure. Is it stable? You know, is one end wave leading into another end wave? And I'll give examples of that. Is it unstable? Did an upward end wave weaken or kind of like break down? You know, the C point got violated. Then that would suggest an unstable end wave, end structure. Is it evolving? So evolving, if you remember when we talked about intermediate wave theory, we talked about how initially the end structure is in place, which is stable, but the first C pullback goes to like the top of the Kumo. I think it was the pound dollar was the example, if I remember correctly. And then the next C pullback, instead of going to the Kumo, goes to the Kijun. So that means the bearishness is continuing to evolve in the favor of the current structure. And then the next one goes down to the Tenkan, and so on. That's an evolving end wave structure. A de-evolving or degrading N wave structure is kind of like an unstable one where the N wave or the pullbacks are getting deeper and deeper. And so that would be degrading in the sense that if it's a bearish structure, and I'll give you some examples, but maybe the first pullback only gets to the Tenkin, and then the second pullback gets to the Kijun. That would be a degrading N wave structure. So that's a lot of concept. It's a lot of different things. Let's start synthesizing those things with some real charts, and then let's talk about them. So the first one, so we're going to look at a chart that we just talked about in the February monthly analysis, which is the dollar yen. Sorry about that bleeping noise, 1 second. So we had talked about that we were mildly bullish on the dollar yen and that the Kumo structure was somewhat favorable, that the 5-line structure was a mixed bag, and that the wave structure was disruptive, at least in terms of the prior bearish structure, and now it's kind of setting up an initial or attempting to set up initial bullish N wave structure. So let's look at this in terms of, let's just start with the 5 lines, and let's start with the Tenkin. The Tenkin is above the Kumo. Is that going to be bullish or bearish? It should be bullish. Is it massively bearish? Well, the Tenkin is above the Kijun, which is healthy. That's generally how it should be for something to be bullish. However, the price action is below it. So while it's bullish, it's in and of itself, there is some kind of less supportive or less uber bullishness to it. And so I want you to think about, how would you grade this? Would you give it 3 pluses, 2 pluses, or 1 plus? Because it does have an overall positive tint to it. But you just got to decide how much, and then we'll kind of compare your answer with mine. I'll show you mine shortly. The Kijun is inside the Kumo. It is below the price action, or the price line, which is bullish in terms of the Kijun, but the Kijun is inside the Kumo. Now, would that make it bullish, neutral, or negative? I want you to think about that for a second. This is good because it'll give you a test of your understanding of the 5 lines. Sorry, taking a sip of tea here. The Kumo is below the price line, so there has to be some bullishness to it. It has a kind of flat top here, which is also supportive. But when we look into the future, it hasn't built enough kind of stability where it's like a rising Kumo, like in a bull trend like this, you see a rising Kumo that suggests that it's going to kind of support things as it goes along, at least for a little bit. So it's kind of flat. In fact, it's trying to, this part is flat and it's trying to recover and it's trying to build something there. So I want you to think about how you would grade this. Would you give it an overall 3 pluses, 2 pluses, 1 plus, or a neutral? Now, the last of the 5 lines is the Chikou. The Chikou is, while above the price line here, it's above the price line, and it's above the Tenkin, it's above the Kijun, it's below the Kumo. Now, if you think about this, for the Chikou to be, and I'm going to give you a hint, for the Chikou to be overly bullish, like plus plus plus, it's going to need to clear everything. So it hasn't yet. It's got one last hurdle to go. And so I want you to think about how your grade is. You can write this down on a piece of paper, how you're grading everything just based on the 5 lines. I want you to take a few seconds. I'm going to pause the video. And you're going to take 30 seconds to put your answer down. And then I'm going to restart and show you my slide of how I graded it. Okay, so you've written your answers. And I'm going to show you mine right now and how I graded it. So this is what I have in terms of the 5 lines for the dollar yen weekly in terms of that. The Tenkin, which is above the Kumo, to me is just one positive. So it's mildly bullish. The Kijun is a zero. It's neutral. While it's below the price line, which is good, with the price line being above the Kumo, it's inside the Kumo. And so that's really kind of a neutral zone for the Kijun. In fact, the Tenkin and the Kijun inside the Kumo, in my opinion, is pretty much any and all the times neutral. So this is important. The Kumo itself is mildly bullish. If the price action and price line is above the Kumo, then by default it has to have some sort of mild bullishness to it. But it's flat, which is, while supportive, it's not it's not like ultra convincing. If it was rising more, then I would give it another plus. And then if it was really thick, and if it was really there was a good distance from it, then to me that would be uber bullish. But we're not. It's flat, and while it's below the price action, it's still flat and not. It hasn't really had a chance to build in the future. So in my opinion, that's just a mild bullishness to it. The Chico span to me is neutral. Why is that? Because for the Chico span to give you a bullish kind of communication, at least the final bull call, and saying, hey, okay, we're good now, it has to clear the Kumo. It's the most important thing it has to clear for that kind of final overall send off from the Chico to be there. It's not. It has cleared the price line, it has cleared the Tenkin, it has cleared the Kijun, but it's still below the Kumo. And so if you think about what that communicates, it's saying, yes, we've cleared price line, Tenkin, and Kijun, which is very helpful. I can't give you the final all clear until I clear the Kumo. So it has hints of bullishness, but it has one major hurdle within the realm of the Chico span. And so those two together, when you combine them, in my opinion, create a neutral kind of perspective on this. So what do we have in terms of the 5 lines? We have a plus, a neutral, a plus, and a neutral. That should translate into a mildly bullish, but overall bullish context. Is it something super aggressive? No. Is it something that if we're going to make 100 trades on the dollar yen right now, we're looking to make 80 to 90% of them bullish? No. It basically means that if you're going to make 100 trades on dollar yen right now, you'd probably make about 55, 57 of them bullish and 43 bearish. That's a mild amount of bullishness. Now, looking at my gradation, Tenkin plus, Kijun 0, Kumo plus, Chico 0, let's go back to the chart. Does this kind of make sense? Can you see this where I'm coming from? Hopefully you can. Now, I know if I had to guess right now what's going on in your head, it's probably just tons of questions. Y'all are probably looking for fixed rules like, well, if the Chico looks like this, could it be a positive, one positive, and two positives, and how can we have fixed rules around this? There isn't any perfect system about this. There was no system created by Hosada, like a gradation system in what I'm showing you. This is from my personal experience and my understanding of Ichimoku and how I approach these individual components, the 5 lines and the wave, and how I would gradate it, and then how I would trade based upon that. And I know you're going to want it all delineated out. Hey, when is it 3? When is it 2? When is it 1? And we're going to get into some of that. But you got to understand there's no perfect set in stone in this. You have to allow for some flexibility. And that also means that there's going to have to be a little bit of ambiguity, and you're just going to have to be comfortable with that. Just because you give it a different gradation than I did, doesn't mean that where it doesn't mean necessarily that you're wrong, and it doesn't mean that we would trade it that much differently. You have to think of this in the perspective, okay, if I make 100 trades based on this chart, does my gradation system accurately reflect how I would trade this based upon the Ichimoku? Because right now, to me, the Ichimoku is saying I should be buying more than selling. But it's not saying I should be aggressively buying more and selling. And it's not saying that it's massively convincing. It's saying there's a minor communication here, enough to tilt the scales, that I'm mildly bullish on this. At least from a 5 lines perspective. So don't worry about perfect, like clarity or like fixed rules on this, or, let's have rules for everything on this. You have to kind of look at what's the overall picture communicating, and based on how I'm, giving this kind of contextual gradation, does it match my experience of this and how many times I'd want to buy versus sell this same chart? And if the answer is yes, then we're pretty much on the same page. And if the answer is no, well then let's look at that. That's something that we can save for the next video. So we've done the gradation in terms of the 5 lines. Let's look at it in terms of the... Now, in terms of the wave structure, I'm going to give this a single bullish positive. And let's kind of get into why. So if we look at how we are in terms of, just kind of look back to what the wave structure was like. We had some bullishness, we had some N waves, another N wave produced a new high, but then we failed and we had a degrading N wave structure. Or not degrading, we had an unstable because it broke the C point here. And once it did this, it officially broke that C point. You could say this is a rejection of that, that's fine, but then this broke it here. So then that wave structure before this kind of overall bullish wave structure, was now unstable and broken at this point. And so we kind of have an A, B, C, D. You could do an A, B, C, D if you want to. However you want to slice it, the N wave structure was continuing to the downside. If you look at, say, maybe you look at this as all one wave. This is an A, this is a B, this is a C, or sorry, A, B, C, D. Even if you slice it, A, B, C, D, or A, B, C, D, it's kind of messy that way. But anyway you slice it, there was a bearish N wave structure in place. However, look what happened. You have one pullback here. This has eclipsed it. And even if this was your pullback, or one of these was your C points, this has eclipsed it. And so, and it did it in an incredibly strong I wave fashion. It did it with a massive amount of bullishness. And, just this one I wave had cleared the Kumo in one shot. It cleared Tenkan Kijun and Kumo in one shot. And so to me, this resets the whole wave structure. So we have an A, kind of your base here. B, C is still forming, which I project to be somewhere between here and here. And then the D, if this is a proper N wave structure, should make a new high. So overall, because of this strong impulsive I wave that had cleared all the lines in one shot, and it looks like it's kind of forming an A, B, C to potential D structure, I'm giving this a mild bullishness. You could make the argument that it's neutral, but because this I wave was so, which is kind of the base of this A to B move, is so impulsive, that you have to kind of lean towards it being more bullish than bearish. Is it massively bullish or heavily bullish? No. But it's pretty darn, it's strong enough for me to give it a bullish context. So that is how I would kind of give this a gradation. We have a mild bullishness in terms of the wave structure, and we have a mild bullishness in terms of the 5 lines. Now, if you think about that gradation, it makes sense based on how I described it in terms of the monthly Ichimoku monthly analysis for February. Now let's look at another pair that's very different, which is the pound yen. Now the pound yen here, let's just start with the 5 lines and let's start with the yen wave or the wave structure. So Tenkin below the Kumo, automatically bearish. It's kind of right about even with the price line, and it's rising. So there is that. The Kijun is continuing to fall. It's also below the Kumo, so it has to be some gradation of bearish. However, it's not in the right position in relationship to the Tenkin. So once you think about how you grade those two, the Chikou, while it's eclipsed the price line, hasn't made it past the Tenkin or the Kijun or even the Kumo. So in terms of the bearish context, there is like one barrier that is crossed for the bull case, but it's still got a lot more to go. However, it's not below the price line. And then let's look at the Kumo. It's thick, it's declining, and the only thing that I would note about it is the distance. So I want you to kind of grade this yourself in terms of the pluses and minuses, and then tell me what you think in terms of the 5 lines, and then I'll show you mine. So I have the Tenkin as just a single bearishness, and the reason being is because it's rising, it's not falling, so that means short-term momentum is kind of going against it. It's also kind of like sideways and almost kind of like break even with the price line, so I give it a minor amount of bearishness. The Kijun is falling and it's below the Kumo, which to me is bearish, but it's not in line with the overall Tenkin should be lower and then the Kijun next. So it has one kind of slight mark against it in my opinion. The Kumo was super close to being all three negative. The distance, or the thing that was the difference was the distance. The price line is super close to the Kumo. And while overall, everything in terms of the Kumo, it's thick, it's declining, it's bearish, it's not far away from the price line. That would be the final coup de grace in my opinion. And the Chikou has two bearish marks against it because it's below the Tenkin, it's below the Kijun, it's below the Kumo, but it's also above the price line. So instead of it being all signs bearish, it's just like one blemish against it. So that's how I marked it in terms of the 5 lines and my gradation. Now in terms of the wave structure, I want you to look at this again, kind of think an A, B, C, D, or an A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Oh, wait a minute. So I kind of want you to think about that. Would that be bullish? Would it be bearish? It has some of the similar features to what the dollar yen did, but there's also something that's missing about it. And so I gave it one bearish mark. And that is because it hasn't like eclipsed the Kumo, and it hasn't eclipsed some of the prior higher C points. It eclipsed a minor C point, which shows that it's degrading or it's unstable. Not degrading, it's unstable. Degrading is when the pullbacks continue to get deeper and deeper, and the penetrations, like in a bear case, the D points are not getting as far away from the B points as much as possible. The further the D point gets from the B point, the stronger it is. But if the D points aren't going as far and they're getting closer and closer to the B points, then that would be kind of like a degrading wave structure. An unstable wave structure is when a prior C point has been disrupted. In this case, it's unstable. However, it hasn't taken out like any major deep C points like the other one did in dollar yen. So I give it one minor bearish mark. And so these are some examples that I have in terms of gradations. There's certainly more we could do, but this video is quite long and there's a lot of information. There's a lot of concepts in here, and I'm sure you have 1,000,001 questions. And so, as I said before, what I think would be the best thing to do for right now is to kind of let this digest, watch it again, write down all your questions, watch it again, see if I've answered some of those questions, and then if I haven't, post them under this video. Also, on top of this, post some charts of your analysis. Pick one time frame, just one. We'll work on combining multiple time frame contexts later. I think that's something we need to accomplish later. I think you just need to get the base skill of being able to kind of understand how we, kind of describe the context of the, 5 lines in the wave structure and how you gradate it and basically approach it. So post some charts, one time frame, and then your gradations, and I'll say I agree with this or I disagree with this, and here's why. And this will start to get some practice in this, and the more you start to do this, the more probably our views will start to line up. And if that's what's happening, there's kind of a convergence of viewpoints, then you're really moving in the right direction. But don't make this decision based upon like 5 charts. We gotta do a lot. And so, this is not something you just get after a few charts. It takes a while. Context in terms of Ichimoku takes a while. So, with that being said, I look forward to your comments and questions on this. I look forward to your charts on this, and let's get to practicing this, because this is a skill that is not totally fixed. It's not like mathematical formulas that you apply this one formula, it always produces the same answer. There's going to be some variance and there's going to be some ambiguity, and you just have to be comfortable with that. The goal is not perfection or perfect clarity. The goal is to find a convergence of understanding. And once you start doing that, then you're going to start seeing your ability to break down the context and make good trading decisions over 100 trades. Like if you were to look at that chart and make 100 trades on that, then how would you approach it? Would you do 70, 60, 40 bullish, bearish? This is all very important. So I look forward to your comments and questions on this. I look forward to your thoughts on this and your charts on this. And let's take some time to explore it. And then in a couple weeks from now, maybe end of the month, I'll do a follow-up video with all the really deep questions. We'll answer it again and we'll kind of dive into it a little bit deeper. And then in the near future, I'll do one on kind of multiple time frame contexts and integrating the two. It's going to be a shorter video because it seems more complicated, but it's not. And it's not even necessarily a skill that you need to have, especially if you're only really trading Ichimoku on 1 or 2 time frames and they're both pretty similar. So with that being said, I look forward to your comments and questions on this. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope it really gives you something kind of like a working template to kind of approach Ichimoku context in the future. So I will see you inside the course.